Hello everyone, Nick here, back again to catch up on some of these new Star Wars Unlimited cards that have been revealed for Twilight of the Republic. We're going to do it, we're going to catch up with everything today, everything up to what has been revealed as of now. There's 25 cards to have a look at today, but we're going to get through them. We're going to do it efficiently. So let's start off. Let's have a quick shout out to the content creators that revealed these. So shout outs to Rebel Resources, Magic Arcanum, comicbook.com, Jodo Cast, Roll On Gaming, Jedi News, Echo Base Gaming, Roll for Crit, and the Hobbyist Novice. Links down in the description to their individual spoilers. Alright, without further ado, let's dive right into this. So first up, we're going to start with the boring stuff again, just a bunch of more draft-oriented cards. We have Battle Droid Legion, Obedient Vanguard, Political Pressure, Soldier of the 501st, Tri-Droid Suppressor, Wolfpack Escort, and Private Manufacturing. So let's go through those in alphabetical order. So Battle Droid Legion is an interesting one for the exploit deck. It doesn't have any color requirement beyond being villainous. Plays a little bit awkwardly though. I don't love that it only has exploit 2. It means the cheapest it can get is 5 resources. And based on what we've seen so far, I really feel like this deck can be doing a lot better by the stage you're able to play a card like this. It also creates tokens, and it creates 3 of them. That's great, but it's on the defeat trigger, so it plays a little bit awkwardly. You want all those tokens before you play a card like this. It feels like a bit of a stopgap between, the cards that set up exploit triggers and the exploit triggers themselves. This is just a weird sort of middleman in between all of that. So yeah, it's okay. It does create a lot of tokens, and maybe the deck wants that just so it can stall out while it's trying to find its haymakers. I just don't see that being a great strategy overall. Obedient Vanguard is an interesting one. It's got one of these trooper upside mechanics. We're seeing a few things like these. Maybe it goes in some kind of weird trooper deck with Captain Kage or something like that. Maybe we're going to have a leader revealed for this that's going to make it work. It's got a weird bit of fringe upside in like a Captain Rex deck, but to activate Captain Rex's ability on the front side, you need clone trooper tokens, so it's probably not what you want to be doing with it. I don't know, maybe the shell comes together. It's very interesting. It's potentially very powerful. I just don't think the pieces are there to make this deck just yet. Political Pressure. Now, this is an interesting one. It could be relevant in like an exploit yellow deck. We are seeing the pieces for that sort of come together. The only reason I'm not so jazzed on this is it's one of these cards which basically force your opponent to make a decision, and we can get a little bit starry-eyed about these effects. Oh great, I get to discard random cards from my opponent's hand or make units. That's both great, but the fact of the matter is, with all cards like this in several different games, your opponent's never going to choose the thing which is best for you. Unless they make a mistake, and don't ever rely on that happening. Yeah, it's great that you get to make 2 Battle Droid tokens, but it probably means that your opponent has something really, really powerful in their hand. Look, maybe it's fantastic. I don't know. Maybe this kind of effect is just so good on both sides if you can sort of really lean into it. Maybe you build an exploit deck that's running yellow that's just so efficient that your opponent can basically never allow you to have tokens, and you can sort of hit important cards fairly consistently. I just don't know if that's going to come together. Interesting to keep an eye on though. Maybe with later cards we'll see if this becomes more relevant. Private Manufacturing is a bit whatever. We're sort of seeing more and more as this game develops that card advantage just isn't as important as it is in other games like Magic the Gathering. It's a 2 resource draw 2, and there's downside if you don't jump through the hoops. In the case of this, you put 2 cards from your hand at the bottom of your deck if you don't control a token unit. And that's just average. You're taking a turn off, you're paying 2 resources just to get a bit of selection, no advantage on your cards. It's uncommon as well. I'm not sure why this is uncommon, but okay, whatever. Soldier of the 501st might be relevant simply because it's a 1-drop clone trooper. No other reason if there is a red deck that wants to play Coordinate. This feels like it's got an okay stat line. A 1-3 with raid 1 for 1 is just great. Making sure you have a good critical mass of 1-drops for a Coordinate deck seems important. Those games where you're able to get 2 1-drops out on turn 1 seems really, really important. We've seen a few of them so far, and yeah, I think for that reason it might be important if that deck wants to be playing red. I think there's a good chance it will. Tripod Suppressor. Look, its exploit value can bring it down to a cost of 3, and 3 costs 4/7, then exhaust an enemy ground unit when it's played. It's a pretty great rate. I'm just not seeing this kind of thing as a standout when we compare it to other exploit things. I mean, we're getting a decent amount of exploit cards that can basically bring their cost all the way down to 0. And I think ultimately that's just going to be too important. But a decent card for draft nonetheless. It's just a really good tempo play, gets you a nice big unit, and exploiting 2 units is not going to be too difficult, given some of the cards we've seen. It's close. It almost gets there in my mind in terms of making it into Premier play, but not quite in my mind. Wolfpack Escort, again, it's a 1-drop, so that just might be super important in certain decks. It's not a clone or a trooper, so you don't have those synergies, but it is a Republic unit. These yellow Republic units, there's a few interesting pieces come together with R2 and the... Oh, I forget what the name of the event is. You make a clone trooper token and you exhaust one of your opponent's units. Also, it's a nice bit of utility. Having the May effect on this, I think, is great. If you have a ground unit that is just close to being killed. If you have any ground units that want to re-trigger their on-played things, like you've got an ambush unit. Maybe this gets played alongside like an ambush-style deck, alongside Enfys Nest and all those kinds of things. There is a leader that we'll be talking about very soon, which I think this becomes very relevant alongside. Yes, I think out of all like these sort of common, uncommon, lower power level cards, this is the one I'm most interested in terms of constructed play. And a decent little aggressive card for draft as well. Okay, let's move on to some more interesting stuff. We have a few upgrades that help with token generation and sort of like token synergies in general. This is Clone Cohort, Droid Cohort, and Nameless Valor. Let's actually go through these cards properly. Clone Cohort is a 2-resource aggressive aspect card. Attached unit gets raid 2, and when defeated, create a clone trooper token. It doesn't provide any stat boost to the unit it's on. Droid Cohort is a 1-resource cunning card. It does provide a stat boost in +1/+1, and attached unit gains when defeated create a battle droid token. Nameless Valor is actually something that goes onto a token unit specifically. In the command aspect for 1 resource, it provides +2/+2 and Overwhelm. And I find this kind of design space very, very interesting. To me, all of these are basically in the same group in terms of evaluating them. Upgrade cards that give you on defeat triggers don't feel great in my mind. Generally, when you play upgrade cards, you want to sort of get use out of that upgrade by making them attack over and over again. You don't really want that unit to be defeated. I find it really, really interesting, actually, that Clone Cohort is more expensive than Droid Cohort. Indeed, it's a higher rarity as well. I just think Droid Cohort is the better card. It gives you the permanent stat boost. Much prefer +1/+1 over raid 2. In most decks, that is. And just being cheaper in resource cost means it's less of a feel bad with that on defeat trigger. It just feels like the more relevant card for constructed play. I might be way off base there, but that's just how I feel about that one. Nameless Valor is an interesting one. I don't know how well it goes in an exploit deck, but in your sort of heavy clone decks, maybe like a Captain Rex double green kind of shell, this could be really, really relevant, actually. That deck is already capable of playing lots of clone trooper tokens. It boosts the stats on them already, so this is just going to, further do that. On the turn that you get out Captain Rex, for example, you're going to have a 2/3 token, so this makes it a 4/5 with Overwhelm. That seems great if you haven't already got a Cody out or something like that. There's also other cards that just boost the stats as well, so stapling on Overwhelm to any token could be surprisingly relevant, especially for 1 resource. Yeah, obviously, +2/+2 and Overwhelm is great for 1 resource, but you've got to temper your expectations. It has to go onto a token. It can't just go onto something massive like most other upgrades do. But pretty interesting nonetheless. The only card out of these 3 that doesn't interest me so much is Clone Cohort. But I think in terms of design, these are very, very interesting because they kind of flip the script on the way we think about upgrades and could end up being surprisingly relevant. I think Nameless Valor in particular is something to watch out for in terms of constructed play. Okay, let's move along and look at some cards individually in terms of higher rarity. Anakin's Interceptor is a space unit. It is a 2-resource aggression heroic 2/3 Jedi Republic vehicle fighter. While your base has 15 or more damage on it, it gets +2/+0. It's interesting because a lot of cards that reference damage on bases is generally agnostic to whose base it's on. So yeah, I don't know. You can't really build around this kind of thing, can you? I don't know. I'm not an aficionado of like your Sabine deck and that kind of stuff. Maybe that really wants it. The idea that you're playing so aggressively that you're playing a bit fast and loose with your own base's damage. Maybe it's something you can side in a Sabine deck. That's something that might be really, really good in the aggressive mirror. But all of that aside, like a 2-3 space unit for 2 is still okay. It's not great. You usually want a bit more upside than that. But if your opponent can't deal with it and it just becomes more relevant in the late game when it starts to grow its stats, might be main deckable, definitely potentially sideboardable in your more aggressive decks. Bold Resistance is a 3-resource event. It has the Tactic trait in aggressive and heroic aspects. Choose up to 3 units that share the same trait. Each of those units gets +2/+0 for this phase. So this is a weird kind of tribal overrun. Yeah, okay. 3 resources feels like a bit much for this kind of effect. You know, we do see the odd overrun style effect in some fringe decks, usually like in double red. There's that card that gives everyone raid. I'll have it up on the screen here. I don't remember what it's called exactly. But in your decks that are running a lot of the same traits, like, you know, like your Sabine Rebel deck, maybe you've got like a Mandalorian deck with Bo-Katan, or maybe there's going to be a Mando shell for Mandalorian things. We've seen a yellow Mandalorian spoiled already. I don't know, it could be interesting. It's about sort of what we get revealed from this point on. Also fairly evergreen in terms of its application in this game. It could be a couple of sets from now. We have a really, really powerful common trait deck that runs a certain type of unit and it is just super aggressive and wants an effect like this. It'll consistently make you win a turn sooner. Yeah, pretty cool. I also want to point out, I love that this is +2/+0 and not Raid 2. Raid 2 doesn't help you defensively, where this card does. It makes it far more likely that your opponent's units will trade way less favourably with your units for that phase. And that seems great in itself. Maybe that's the thing that really pushes this over the edge. Maybe that's the reason that this is good outside of your hyper-aggressive strategies. Sort of remains to be seen, though. I'm curious to see what this card does. I might want to do a bit of testing with this. I do happen to run a Bo-Katan Mandalorian deck myself. I'm not sure how badly that deck wants this kind of effect, but something I want to test out anyway, so we'll see how that goes. Oh, we have a new copy of Enfys Nest. Okay, this is really interesting. She is a 7-resource cunning heroic 5/7 underworld ground unit. She has Saboteur, and when played and on attack, you may return an enemy non-leader unit with less power than this unit to its owner's hand. So this is a very powerful, repeatable effect. Being able to bounce your opponent's units, especially in this game when sequencing is everything, more than a game like Magic the Gathering, is no joke. The question really is, especially in these colours with the Underworld trait, is this card going to be the best thing you can do at 7 resources? Because at 7 resources, you can get Fennec Shand or Hound Solo. 2 very powerful ambushes that fairly consistently give you a delete button on one of your opponent's units. The difference is, yes, this effect is less powerful. It generally won't hit units as big as those 2 cards, but it is repeatable. The fact you get it when you play it and when she attacks as well. If you've got any way to grow her power, that gets to a stage where, yes, she can start to bounce things that are larger. Say you smuggle in a DL-44 blaster rifle. She then attacks as a 7 power unit and she can bounce anything that has less than 7 power, which seems great. Also, do remember that the relevant units in this game don't all necessarily have super high power. It is possible that she might bounce something that costs more than her. It isn't super likely, but it is possible. In any case, I'm super interested to see where this card goes. I think in general, in terms of the support we're getting for this colour and things at this cost, the ambushes are going to feel more consistent overall. I just can't shake the fact that this might be super powerful simply because the effect is repeatable. That might just be too relevant in some matchups. Luminara Nduli. This is a 7-resource Vigilance heroic unit, a 4/9 Force Jedi Republic ground unit. Coordinate Grit, and when played, choose a base, heal 1 damage from it for each unit you control. A nice bit of fringe upside that she can choose a base, you know, in Twin Suns that might be relevant. I do look at this card more as a premier card though. Yes, there is some stiff competition at this cost. In these colours, we're looking at things like Luke Skywalker. Maybe having Republic is just too important at that point. I also like that it's one of these coordinate cards where not triggering coordinate doesn't really wholly invalidate this card. Yes, obviously having Grid Online is great. But as a 4/9 for 7 that just heals a bunch of damage off of your base alone seems great. It seems like a really powerful board stall for the decks that want it. Just be aware that, yes, you can play haymakers and things that do proactively try to end the game rather than stuff like this. Really cool design, though. It's got a couple of really important traits, if decks care about that. Yeah, just good stuff in general. I think there's going to have to be some testing of this in some of the Ray decks that we're seeing. Doing some pretty good stuff in the meta right now. We have San Hill. This is a 6-resource Cunning and Villainy 3/7 Separatist official ground unit. He has Exploit 3, which means he can cost 0, and on attack for each friendly unit that was defeated this phase, ready a friendly resource. I wish there was a more mechanical through line between those abilities, like, I don't know, if there's a way to play him and then immediately ready him, which I guess yellow can do. It means if you exploit him out for 0, ready him with some other like event card or something like that, and then attack, you actually are resource positive at that point. Which is a bit of fun. It's also a 3/7 that can potentially cost 0. Like, these kinds of exploit effects I think are going to be important. The things that can ultimately cost 0. And not terrible at different costs. In fact, if you only exploit 1 unit with this, that seems good. 4 resource for a 3/7 that can untap stuff as he attacks. Yeah, that seems great. I think if there is an exploit deck in yellow in Premier, this is going to be a pretty solid include. Self-Destruct. We have a 2-resource Aggression and Villainous Aspect tactic event. Defeat a friendly unit. If you do, deal 4 damage to a unit. So we got a 2-resource red-black thing that deals a bunch of stuff with downside. I think in general I'm going to be preferring to play copies of Force Choke over this. Going down 1 unit as opposed to just giving your opponent a card feels like a bit more of a cost, plus that does 5 damage. Self-Destruct only does 4 damage, so yeah. That's kind of where I am with this. However, you know, in the exploit shell, if that's firing on all cylinders, it may potentially be way less cost than we think. I think the thing that really clinches it for me, the thing that really makes me want to prefer running copies of Force Choke over this doesn't work on turn 1. It doesn't work if you have no units. Force Choke is always online. This can work on vehicles. I think that's a reason you might want to sideboard this. Maybe a couple of this in the sideboard that gets substituted out when your opponent's playing a lot of vehicles and it's super relevant that you hit them. Yeah, it seems okay. I just think too many scenarios want Force Choke over this. Okay, the rare base we've had revealed. This is the red one this time. 25 health, and when you would deploy a leader, draw a card. And yeah, I kind of agree with most people's assessment on this. I think I just generally prefer Tarkin Town in general. Tarkin Town is removal on a stick. It's removal that you always have access to. So if you're juking out for position early game, you know, you're playing a aggressive deck and you want to make sure that your units live into turn 2, turn 3, Tarkin Town's probably going to be a better option. The one reason I don't totally write this off is because it doesn't require an action like Tarkin Town does. You just get an extra card when you deploy your leader. It means you're not spending an extra action in order to utilize the base, and it might be the difference between you getting initiative, and that might be super important in a very hyper-aggressive deck. Yeah. Card advantage in Star Wars Unlimited, man, it's just, I don't think it's that important. That's kind of where I'm at with this. I don't know, maybe it's really important with some red leader at some point that the extra card just adds so much more value. I just don't see it right now. Alright, moving on to the highest rarity of all. We have a couple of yellow cards in Legendary, and both of these are very, very interesting to me. Let's start off with the event. Now, there are 2 of them. A 3-resource Trick. If you control exactly 1 unit, play a non-vehicle unit from your hand that shares a trait with the unit you control. It costs 5 less. The play pattern with this card feels absurd. You can play a unit on turn 1, 1 or 2 resources, and on turn 2, you just put a 5-drop on the table. Yeah, that seems great. Now, it has to be common traits. We have to have a tribal theme going on with your deck to really make it worthwhile. And I think realistically, if you're playing a card like this, it's not like a sub theme. It's not like a Sabine yellow deck that's playing some amount of rebels. I think ultimately this is an all-in style tribal effect, or a common trait, I guess we'd call it in Star Wars Unlimited. We need a word for that in this game. But for any of those decks that happen to be yellow, yep, great. Really, really solid. Your Underworld decks, for example, that, you've got your McClunkies, you've got your Lady Proximas. On turn 2, you can drop an Enfys Nest and just go to town with your ambushes. That just seems really, really solid. Oddly enough, I think this is pretty bad with Sith, which is, the flavor of what's going on here. Sith don't really have a good amount of lower cost cards, at least for the time being. They're probably not playing yellow at this point either, and because of those two things, it's going to be really hard to make this work in a Sith deck. Kind of weird. I'm not saying it shouldn't be yellow. It absolutely is a yellow card mechanically. But yes, definitely worth watching out for. Like in the comments, please go nuts. What kind of decks can we put this in? Yellow's an interesting one. It just doesn't have a lot of common trait mechanics just yet. You know, if we were talking green, we could be talking about Republic and Separatist and all that kind of stuff. Red for Rebellion. Yellow is Underworld, potentially as a splash color. Oh yeah, it might be good in a Separatist deck. That's kind of where I'm thinking with this one. Lots of potential, and also very evergreen in terms of how it applies to future cards. If there's more yellow Mandalorian cards coming down the line, for example, this could be super relevant for that deck as well. So definitely something worth keeping an eye on. I think it's going to do something powerful in this set, and it's just going to keep doing powerful stuff as more stuff comes out. Okay, let's move on to Chancellor Palpatine. This is a very interesting looking card. He is a 4 resource double cunning aspect, 2/6 Republic official ground unit. Each token unit you create enters play ready. On attack, if a unit left play this phase, create a clone trooper token. Fun stuff. I really like that on attack trigger because it works in so many different ways. You can be removing your opponent's units. You'd be paying an exploit cost. It doesn't matter whether it's your unit or your opponent's unit. Also, the fact that the tokens come in ready. It is double yellow. It's not going to go in the decks that are playing double green, unfortunately. Probably from a power level point of view, that's probably a smart move. But this is just so much fun. In terms of like a common trait deck, like running this in a Republic deck, I don't think that's going to be super realistic. I mean, who knows? We'll see what else comes out. But in terms of like a legendary card, this is exactly the kind of thing I want to see printed in legendary. It's fun. It's splashy. That first line of text is deceptively powerful, in my opinion. Yeah, I think this is going to be no joke. I'm thinking probably more like a heroic sort of Republic shell. If we get tokens in other factions later on, again, something that's going to be relevant for quite a while. If that's done, that is. Maybe that's just going to be a theme of the Clone Wars and not really beyond that. But I am super excited to play around with this card. A double yellow token deck. Maybe some leaders that are going to get revealed later on are going to just want this kind of effect, but yeah. I like it when a legendary card just sort of begs the question, can you build around this? Can we make this work in this colors? This is really cool. This is a really fun design. All right, we had 2 leaders revealed as well. Let's start off with Quinlan Voss. He is in the cunning and heroic aspect. When you play a unit, you may exhaust this leader. If you do, deal 1 damage to an enemy unit that costs the same as the played unit. He can deploy using his epic at 5 resources, and he is a 3/7 Force Jedi Republic ground unit. When you play a unit, you may deal 1 damage to an enemy unit that costs the same or less than that played unit. So essentially the same effect, but you're not doing it once per turn. And I can see why people are a little bit down on this effect, but I don't know. The more I look at it, the more I think of it, the more I'm interested in this kind of thing. It kind of sits in my mind in the same place as the Fennec Shand leader, where you just want to be playing a whole heap of stuff with ambush. Indeed, on-played triggers in general seem like a solid option for this. Maybe like an Underworld McClunky shell where you can play your units over and over again, get ambush triggers and aggressively start targeting down your opponent's units. Might not be great against all decks, but seems nice and aggressive. And a fun little control piece for this kind of color pairing. Could be interesting in the double yellow shell. That means we get to play things like Chancellor Palpatine and Cunning. Just remember that putting a token into play is not the same as playing them. Playing something means it's a card in your hand, you pay it resources, you play it from your hand. Making tokens is not playing a unit. It also, and again, I'm sounding like a broken record at this point, but pairing it with ECL, yes, you get cards with great on-play triggers. It works with that base that everyone loves. Great, more upside for ECL. Yeah, like a yellow-green ambush shell, you know, outside of the conversation with ACL. Seems really, really fun. The idea that you can just play a whole heap of Underworld units, maybe, you know, maybe like a shell that's playing like Mars Katana, your McClunkies, your Lady Proxima, that kind of stuff, and you get to play things over and over again, and that results in you dealing a bunch of damage. The cool thing is, it doesn't matter what arena your opponent's unit's in, as long as it shares the resource cost, it can go across things. That deck, I think, is going to want to specifically make sure it's playing a lot of 1 and 2 drops. simply so it can play a lot of cards, but also make sure you're matching up the cost of your opponent's cards. It matches up pretty poorly against high cost units on your opponent's side. Even if you are playing expensive units, dealing 1 damage to like a 7 or an 8 drop doesn't really feel that impactful. Generally, when it comes to units of that size, you just want to buy cards that can just defeat them outright or deal a whole heap of damage to them. 1 damage to Luke Skywalker ain't really such a big deal, ultimately. Really cool, fun design on this. I'm curious to see where it goes. Okay, one last leader to have a look at, and we also have a few cards alongside it that sort of play into his game strategy. This is Nute Gunray, Vigilance and Villainy aspect. Action, tap. If 2 or more friendly units was defeated this phase, create a Battle Droid token. He can deploy at 6 resources. And he's a 2/8 Separatist official ground unit. On attack, create a Battle Droid token. And I don't know how much constructed play Nute's going to see. Ultimately, in terms of like the big exploit payoffs, I think Count Dooku is just going to be the more prevailing choice more often. Even if you are playing blue and green, I think this deck ultimately has to be playing green in order to get access to a lot of tokens. I still think in that choice, Dooku in general is the better option. However, it is kind of leaning into a different game strategy to Dooku. Nute Gunray is more of like a turbo exploit leader, in that you're basically turboing out the ability to exploit. You're more enabling that kind of game mechanic, where Dooku is more of like a mid-range thing. You get a bit more access to your more powerful units. You can play more haymakers earlier. Nute is just making sure that you exploit over and over and over and over and over and over again. So pairing him alongside cards with your on-defeat triggers. You've got those cheap little units that make battle droids when they're defeated. Maybe you can pair Nute with red as well. We're seeing a couple of things that have some pretty decent on-defeat triggers. And any sort of large unit that has a nice hefty exploit cost might just function a bit better in a Nute Gunray deck as opposed to a Count Dooku deck. Speaking of which, the cards that we saw spoiled alongside Nute Gunray that sort of feed into his strategy is Malevolence, Multi-Troop Transport, and Rune Haako. So Malevolence is a very, very interesting card. It is a 9-resource Vigilance Villainy Space Unit, 7/7 Separatist Vehicle Capital Ship, exploit 4, so it can cost as low as 1, which is absurd. Restore 2, and when played, give an enemy unit -4, -0 for this phase, and it can't attack. So you can greatly reduce a unit's stats and then just charge it down with all of your units. Feels like a great all-in stacks on effect for blue. I quite like that a lot. And this kind of thing is a fairly decent payoff, I think, in general, especially in blue as well. The fact that it has Restore 2, deceptively powerful on a card like this, especially if you can turbo it out sooner. It does feel like a card that's probably going to play better with Nute Gunray than Count Dooku. Having said that, I think Count Dooku still might be more powerful overall and still might play this card regardless. Nevertheless, it's a great control piece. It slows down the game by giving you Restore 2. And it can also close out the game as well. It's doing a lot of things in this deck. Really, really powerful unit, and it's got the Separatist trait as well. So, that does matter in terms of a lot of the blue cards we're seeing for the exploit mechanic. Multi-Troop Transport, a bit of a lower power sort of payoff. 7-resource Vigilant ground unit, 3/6 Separatist Vehicle Tank, exploit 2, so it can cost as low as 3. And on attack, create a Battle Droid token. This is ultimately, I don't think what you want to be using 3 resources for in general, but the fact of the matter is it's got decent stats. It can stick around and maybe create 1 or 2 battle droids. That makes it okay in my mind, but it might be a bit more of a draft card, just putting that out there. Apart from anything else, I don't know if we're going to see a critical mass of blue cards that really feed into exploit, so this might see Premier play just out of necessity. It's just one of those common exploit cards, which seems okay when you can pay it for its full exploit cost, but really bad when you're not, kind of thing. Repeatable token generation is no joke though, so if it is consistent enough, it could be pretty great. We also had Rune Haako, and this is a great sort of nice consistent exploit card, I feel. A 2-resource Vigilant Villainy, 3/2 ground unit with the Separatist and official trait. When played, if a friendly unit was defeated this phase, you may give a unit -1/-1 for this phase. He doesn't have exploit himself, so you can't just play him off exploit and always consistently trigger that ability. But the fact of the matter is, if you've got really hyper efficient exploit cards like Malevolence and some other things that we've seen, having the extra 2 resources left over afterwards doesn't seem that difficult ultimately. So nice and consistent. It's a 3-2 on turn 1. That's always relevant for these kinds of things. Just bear in mind the trigger's a little bit underwhelming. It's obviously great if you're Nugwood and if your opponent's battle droids, or I don't know, like a Death Star Stormtrooper or something like that. I just feel like you're not always going to be triggering that. Just playing a 3-2 on turn 1, that's okay. I feel like the floor on this is pretty good. That's why I'm not so down on this card. But you might occasionally kill something massive that only has 1 health left, and that's going to feel great with a card like this. I think the weirdest thing about Rune Haako, though, is, yeah, he's obviously good in the Nute Gunray deck. He's actually really good in the Count Dooku deck, because you can give him Exploit 1, play him for free, and kill something with him. That actually seems like a better play pattern in general. I didn't think about that till I pressed the record button. That's pretty cool. Yeah, okay, so I guess if Count Dooku wants to be playing blue, I don't know if he will. I think Count Dooku with double green is probably more what we're going to be doing, but I think with cards like this and Malevolence and we've got like, I forget the name of the card, that 2 resource card that creates a battle droid on defeat, maybe blue for exploit's going to be relevant. Nute Gunray I feel like is ultimately a bit more fringe than Count Dooku, but could be a lot of fun. Could be like your more casual thing that can spike out and do some crazy things. For your more turbo exploit decks, I like that we have 2 different exploit leaders, and I like that they kind of lean into different deck types. That's pretty cool and fun. And that's it. That's all the cards we had spoiled up until this point. No more breaks. Thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to jump on the Discord so you can chat all things X-Wing and Star Wars Unlimited with us. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and ring that bell so you can stay caught up with all the Star Wars Unlimited stuff coming out. With all that out of the way, I'll catch all of you in the next video.